Dana Morris, the CEO of Horizon Lux Holdings, stood in front of the Grand Crest Hotel in downtown New York, watching the misty rain streak down the windows. She had seen this hotel countless times before. The Grand Crest was known for its luxurious rooms, stunning views, and impeccable service. It was one of the many jewels in the Horizon Lux crown, a brand she had built from the ground up. Yet today, Dana was not here to enjoy the comfort of the hotel. She wasn't here as the CEO. Dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a rain-soaked coat, Dana was on a mission to uncover the truth behind a string of anonymous complaints she had been receiving. Guests were reporting poor service, especially people of color, who were claiming they were treated unfairly. As someone who prided herself on running a company based on inclusivity, Dana needed to see for herself if there was any truth to these allegations. With only a carry-on suitcase in hand, Dana approached the hotel's front desk. The lobby, as usual, was grand, with shiny marble floors and chandeliers that glittered above. She walked up to the front desk, greeted by a young woman behind the counter, whose name tag read Vanessa. Vanessa smiled but didn't seem to be paying much attention to Dana. "Good afternoon," Dana said, placing her reservation confirmation on the counter. "I'm here to check in." Vanessa glanced at Dana's paperwork and then back at her, her eyes narrowing slightly. She seemed to hesitate before swiping Dana's card. "There's no reservation under your name," she said dismissively, her tone more indifferent than concerned. Dana felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her cool. She had done her homework. She knew her reservation was confirmed, and she had the email to prove it. "I'm sure there's some mistake," Dana said calmly, pulling out her platinum card. "I'm Dana Morris. I have a reservation here, and I'm willing to pay for a room again if needed." Vanessa barely looked at her. "There's nothing in the system," she repeated, flipping through her computer screen without making eye contact. Dana stood there for a moment, processing the situation. "This is the same hotel I've invested in. The same hotel that I built." She knew she had to keep her composure. She looked around the lobby, noticing that some of the other guests, mostly white, were checking in without any issues. They were being greeted with friendly smiles and easy banter. The feeling of being invisible, of being dismissed, settled in Dana's stomach. She had heard the reports before, but seeing it with her own eyes was different. She had worked her way to the top, overcoming countless obstacles, and yet in this moment, she felt like a stranger in her own hotel. "Can I speak to your manager?" Dana asked, her voice steady. Vanessa blinked, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth, before she turned away to call the manager. Within minutes, a man appeared, a tall, middle-aged man in a well-tailored suit. He had an air of authority about him, but the indifference in his eyes was unmistakable. "You're the manager?" Dana asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Yes, I'm Richard Alden, the general manager," he replied, barely sparing her a glance. "How can I help you?" Dana presented her confirmation again. "There seems to be some confusion. I have a reservation, but your staff is telling me otherwise. Can you help me sort this out?" Richard glanced at her briefly before turning his attention to the computer screen. "There's no reservation under your name. Maybe you should try a more budget-friendly hotel. We don't just give our premium suites to anyone," he said dismissively. Dana's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked around the lobby again, noticing the guests who were being checked in effortlessly. She watched as a couple walked in, smiling and laughing as they handed over their reservations. The receptionist didn't hesitate. They were checked in immediately. "I can pay again," Dana said, trying to maintain her composure. "I just need a room." Richard didn't seem interested in her willingness to pay. "Sorry, we're fully booked," he said, looking at her with a hint of condescension in his eyes. It was in that moment that Dana knew she wasn't going to get the help she needed here. She wasn't just being ignored because of a system error or an overbooked night. This was something deeper. This was bias. She had suspected it for weeks, but now, standing in the lobby of her own hotel, Dana realized just how much work there was to do. Turning away from the desk, Dana pulled out her phone and made a call. She wasn't sure how long it would take, but she was sure it would be worth it. Moments later she stood there, a quiet resolve building inside her. A few minutes later, the door to the hotel's front entrance swung open. A woman, sharply dressed and carrying an air of authority, walked into the lobby. She had the kind of confidence Dana knew well. It was Janet Whitmore, the CEO of Horizon Lux Holdings. The temperature in the room shifted immediately. Dana's identity was about to be revealed. Janet walked confidently up to the front desk, where Richard and Vanessa stood. "This is Dana Morris," she announced, her voice cutting through the awkward silence. "CEO of the company that owns this hotel." Richard's face turned pale. Vanessa froze, her previous smirk gone. The security cameras had captured every second. The dismissive tone, the biased treatment, the way Dana had been treated like she didn't matter. Dana stood there, calm and poised, her gaze never leaving Richard's. "The issue isn't how you treat people once you know who they are," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's how you treat people when you think they don't matter." The words hung in the air as the staff realized the truth. Their actions had just cost them their jobs. And Dana was just getting started. The room was still, with an almost palpable tension hanging in the air. Dana stood at the center of the lobby, the eyes of the staff now fixed on her, their previous confidence shattered. Richard Alden, the hotel manager, looked like he had just been struck by lightning. His face, once haughty and assured, was now pale, and he shifted uncomfortably on his feet. Janet Whitmore, Dana's CEO, remained unwavering beside Dana, her sharp eyes scanning the stunned faces of the hotel staff. It was clear that Richard and the others hadn't expected the woman standing before them to be the very person they had just humiliated. Dana wasn't just any guest. She was their boss, the CEO of the company that owned this hotel. Dana wasn't angry. There was no shouting or pointing fingers. Instead, there was a quiet, searing clarity in her eyes. She knew that reacting in anger would only play into the hands of those who saw her as an angry, irrational leader. She had worked too hard for too long to be dismissed as just that. "Is there a problem here, Richard?" Dana asked, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made Richard flinch. Richard took a deep breath, his throat dry. I didn't know who you were," he stammered, but his excuse sounded weak, even to his own ears. He was a man of authority, used to being in control, but in this moment, his position crumbled. Dana didn't respond to his apology. She didn't need to. "This is not about you knowing who I am," she said slowly. "This is about how you treated me the moment you thought I didn't matter. How you dismissed me when you assumed I wasn't important enough for your premium service." Richard looked down at the desk, his hands fumbling with the pen in front of him. He had been caught red-handed, and he knew it. There was no denying it. I apologize for the misunderstanding," he said, his voice barely audible. Dana didn't react to the apology. Instead, she turned to the rest of the staff, her eyes sweeping over the now silent group. "This," she began, gesturing to the scene around her, "is not just a problem with one person. This is a systemic issue. You all failed to treat me with the respect and service that every guest deserves, because of how I look. And because of how I was dressed." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. The staff exchanged uncomfortable glances, some of them looking at the floor, others staring at their shoes, unwilling to meet Dana's gaze. They knew she was right. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern that had been allowed to fester under their noses for far too long. Janet stepped forward, her voice firm as she spoke to the staff. "What Dana is saying is the truth. The footage from the security cameras shows everything. Every denial, every glance, every moment of bias." Janet turned to the group, her eyes sharp. "This is not just about poor service. It's about a culture of discrimination that has thrived for too long at this hotel. And it stops now." There was a brief, stunned silence before Dana spoke again. "Richard, Vanessa," she said, her voice carrying weight, "I'm going to have to let you go." Richard's face went ashen. Vanessa, who had been standing beside him, suddenly looked like she might faint. Her earlier smirk was gone, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. "You can't be serious," Vanessa said, her voice trembling. I am serious," Dana interrupted. "You've both demonstrated behavior that cannot be tolerated in this company. Not only did you fail to provide the service our guests deserve, but you also contributed to an environment of exclusion. And that's unacceptable." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but Dana raised her hand, silencing him. "There's no room for discussion," she said firmly. "You're both dismissed. You can collect your things and leave." Vanessa seemed ready to argue, but Janet stepped in, her voice icy. "The decision has been made. You'll be escorted out by security." Dana didn't say another word as the two employees gathered their belongings and left the hotel in stunned silence. The remaining staff members looked uneasy, unsure of what to do next. But Dana wasn't finished. Turning to face the remaining employees, Dana took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "This isn't just about two people," she continued. "This is about every single one of you. This is about how we treat our guests, how we treat each other. You are all responsible for creating an environment that welcomes and respects everyone, no matter their race, their background, or how they're dressed. Today is the beginning of a new chapter for the Grand Crest, and it starts with accountability." The room was heavy with tension. Some employees shifted nervously, while others stood taller, already feeling the weight of Dana's words. There was no doubt that her leadership was about to change everything. "We're not just going to fire two people and call it a day," Dana continued. "I'm bringing in an expert to help reshape the culture here. This hotel, and the entire Horizon Luxe brand, stands for inclusivity and fairness. And if you can't be a part of that, then you don't belong here." She looked to Janet. "Janet, let's start the training." Janet nodded, pulling out a tablet and quickly syncing it with the hotel's internal system. "I've already contacted Jordan Reyes, the diversity expert we've worked with before. He'll be here first thing tomorrow to start the training. All of you will attend. This is non-negotiable." Dana's eyes scanned the room once more. "We are better than this. We must be better than this." With that, she turned and walked towards the lobby's exit. Janet followed close behind her, leaving the stunned staff to process what had just transpired. The days that followed Dana's confrontation at the Grand Crest Hotel were nothing short of tense. The hotel staff had been shaken to their core, many of them now questioning the actions they had taken and the culture they had allowed to exist under their noses. The next few hours passed in a blur of whispered conversations, uncertain glances, and a sense of fear. Richard and Vanessa's sudden departure had left an air of unease hanging over the hotel, but it also marked the beginning of something far greater than anyone could have anticipated. Dana's decision to hold everyone accountable for their actions had sent a clear message. The management team, once confident and dismissive of the complaints, now faced the consequences of their own behavior. The reality of losing their jobs, or worse, being exposed as part of a system that enabled inequality, was now a weight many of them struggled to bear. But while the air inside the hotel was thick with tension, Dana's own determination never wavered. The CEO had a vision of a hotel that served as a model for inclusivity, respect, and fairness. And she wasn't about to let the toxic culture that had festered here stand in the way of that. Dana and Janet sat in a sleek, modern conference room later that afternoon, reviewing the footage from the security cameras, and going over the records of complaints that had accumulated over the past few months. The magnitude of the issue became more evident with each passing minute. "This is worse than I imagined," Janet said, scrolling through a report that outlined guests' experiences, many of whom had left detailed complaints about biased treatment. "We've got multiple reports where guests were either ignored or worse, treated like they didn't belong here." Dana leaned forward, her face tight with concentration. "I knew there was something wrong. I just didn't realize it was this bad." Richard and Vanessa were only the tip of the iceberg. "The real problem runs deeper." Janet nodded. "We've got to fix this, Dana. And we've got to do it fast. The media is going to get wind of this. We'll need a plan, and it needs to be immediate." Dana's eyes softened for a moment, a rare flicker of vulnerability. She wasn't just angry, she was disappointed. Disappointed that the place she had worked so hard to build, the place that represented her values, had been allowed to fall into this mess. But she didn't have time for self-pity. The hotel still had guests to serve, and the clock was ticking. "Start working on a public statement," Dana instructed. "But don't just make it about apologies. Make it about accountability. Make it about real change." As Janet got to work drafting the statement, Dana made a phone call to someone she knew could help. She dialed the number for Jordan Reyes, the renowned diversity and inclusion consultant she had worked with in the past. Dana knew Jordan was the kind of person who could create real change. And fast. "Jordan, I need your help," Dana said, her voice steady but urgent. "I've just fired 2 senior staff members, and I'm about to make some serious changes to the culture here at the Grand Crest. I need you to come in and lead a series of workshops on bias and inclusivity. We've got a lot of work to do, and we don't have time to waste." "On my way," Jordan replied without hesitation. The following day, the hotel's ballroom was transformed into a training center. Every single employee, housekeepers, bellhops, front desk agents, restaurant staff, was present, seated in neat rows, their faces a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Dana stood at the front, dressed in a burgundy suit, projecting power and poise. It was her moment to take control and set the tone for the next chapter of the Grand Crest's journey. "Thank you all for being here today," Dana began, her voice calm but firm. "What you're about to hear may be difficult for some of you, but it's necessary. This company has prided itself on being a leader in hospitality, but we've allowed something terrible to grow within our walls. Discrimination, unconscious, subtle, and sometimes overt, has poisoned the way we serve our guests." She paused, allowing her words to settle. The room was completely silent now. "We've heard your complaints. We've seen the footage. And we know that what happened here wasn't a series of isolated incidents. It was a pattern of behavior. And it's not just about the people who are no longer here. It's about all of us." Dana's gaze swept over the room, making eye contact with each person. "You are all part of this change. We will not allow bias, discrimination, or unequal treatment to thrive in this company. If you are here, it's because we believe you have the ability to grow, to change, and to help us rebuild our foundation. But if you can't do that, then you won't have a place here." A murmur passed through the room, but Dana raised a hand to quiet them. "You don't need to like each other, but you do need to respect each other. From this day forward, the Grand Crest will be a place where everyone is welcome. And anyone who doesn't believe that is no longer part of our team." Janet stepped up beside Dana, signaling the beginning of the first session. Jordan Reyes walked into the room, his presence commanding and confident. His reputation as a diversity expert was well known, and his first words immediately set the tone. "We're here to talk about the things that make us uncomfortable," Jordan began, looking out at the employees. "And let me be clear, this is not just about the guests we serve. This is about how we treat each other. It starts with you, and it starts now." The next few hours were intense. Employees were forced to confront their biases, their actions, and the uncomfortable truths they had allowed to fester. Real stories were shared, stories of favoritism, exclusion, and subtle forms of racism that had crept into the hotel's culture. A concierge admitted to recommending restaurants based on the color of the guest's skin. A front desk agent confessed to assigning rooms differently depending on how the guest was dressed. The room was filled with discomfort, but also with growth. By the end of the day, Dana knew they had made progress. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. She had planted the seeds of change. Now it was up to them to water them, to nurture them, and to let the transformation take root. The weeks following Dana's bold decision to reshape the Grand Crest's culture were filled with intense meetings, hard conversations, and steady progress. While many of the hotel's staff had initially resisted the changes, most of them began to realize the importance of the transformation taking place. The environment had shifted from one of silent discomfort to one of open, though often awkward conversations about bias, fairness, and inclusivity. Dana's commitment to overseeing the change didn't waver. Every day, she walked through the hotel with purpose, meeting with employees at all levels, talking to them about their experiences, and ensuring that the vision she had for the Grand Crest was becoming a reality. She knew that meaningful change didn't happen overnight, but she also knew that if she didn't take this opportunity to truly reform the culture, then the hotel would simply fall back into the same old habits. The first few weeks were tough. Many of the hotel's longtime employees found the new environment uncomfortable, even painful. But this was the price of growth. Dana had set the bar high, and she expected everyone, no matter their position, to rise to meet it. One of the first steps was the arrival of Claudia Rivera, the new general manager of the Grand Crest. Claudia had been a successful executive in the hospitality industry for years, and while she had the experience to run a luxury hotel, what made her the perfect fit for this moment was her background. Claudia was Latina, and she had once been a guest at the Grand Crest, where she had been denied service because of the color of her skin. That experience had stayed with her, and now she was in a position to lead the change from within. When Claudia first stepped into her new role, she immediately sat down with Dana and Janet to discuss the hotel's goals moving forward. "I've seen what needs to be fixed," Claudia said, her voice steady and confident. "And I've experienced it firsthand. I'm here because I believe in what we're doing. I believe in making this hotel a place where everyone is treated equally, regardless of their background." Dana looked at her with a sense of hope. "I need you to be my eyes and ears. We need a new culture here, Claudia. One where the values we speak of are lived every day." Claudia nodded. "We're going to make it happen." The first initiative Claudia tackled was the hiring process. Dana had made it clear that they needed to build a more diverse and inclusive team, so Claudia implemented a new approach to recruitment. Every candidate, regardless of their race, gender, or background, would be given equal consideration. The days of unconscious bias influencing who got hired or promoted were over. Claudia personally oversaw the interviews, ensuring that the hiring process was transparent, fair, and reflective of the hotel's new values. As the new hires began to settle in, Dana's vision for inclusivity began to take shape. The staff started to reflect the diversity of the guests they served. Housekeepers, bellhops, and front desk agents all represented a broad range of backgrounds, but more importantly, they shared a commitment to the new culture Dana had championed. The next phase of the transformation involved a complete overhaul of how the hotel interacted with guests. Claudia made it a point to address any instance of biased behavior immediately, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Every guest, regardless of their appearance or socioeconomic status, was treated with the same level of respect. The front desk agents no longer assumed that a guest who didn't look important would be okay with a standard room. They greeted each guest with warmth, offered assistance, and ensured that every person who walked through the doors of the Grand Crest felt welcomed and valued. For Dana, the biggest change came in the form of customer service training. She had long believed that the hotel's staff had the potential to be world-class, but that potential had been squandered by a lack of proper training and a culture of bias. In the weeks following the staff changes, Dana personally facilitated meetings where staff members were encouraged to share their experiences and reflect on how they could improve. It wasn't easy, and at times it felt like too much. But every day, Dana saw the team's commitment to improving. One day, Dana decided to test the changes she had put in motion. She came to the Grand Crest unannounced, this time in casual clothes, blending in with the other guests. She watched as the staff interacted with everyone who walked in. She noted how a black family was greeted with smiles and offered an upgraded room. She watched as an elderly Asian couple was treated with kindness and respect, just as any other guest would be. When Dana reached the front desk, she was greeted warmly by a young woman who had only recently been hired. The receptionist didn't recognize her, and that was exactly what Dana wanted. The greeting was genuine, the service was efficient, and there was no hesitation. Dana felt a sense of pride swell within her. This was the hotel she had always envisioned, one where every guest, regardless of who they were, received top-notch service. Later that day, Dana sat down with Claudia to debrief. "The changes are starting to stick," Dana said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "I saw what I needed to see today. The team is on the right path." Claudia smiled. "It's not perfect yet, but it's better than it was. We still have a lot of work to do, but we're getting there." And that was the truth. The Grand Crest Hotel was no longer the place Dana had walked into months ago. It had been reborn, its culture shifting from one of exclusion to one of inclusion and respect. But Dana knew that the work couldn't stop here. There were still other hotels in her chain to address. There were still guests to serve, still biases to address, still change to be made. And Dana was determined to see it through. 6 months had passed since the dramatic confrontation at the Grand Crest Hotel. The changes Dana Morris had set in motion were no longer just theories or hopes. They were tangible, real, and visible. The hotel, once a place of subtle biases and systemic discrimination, had become a shining example of how commitment to inclusivity and fairness could truly transform a business. Dana was ready for her first unannounced visit since the overhaul. She wanted to see if the changes had taken root, to test whether the hotel truly reflected the values she had fought so hard to instill. Dana wasn't looking for perfection. She knew it would take time. But she needed to know that the Grand Crest was no longer a place where people, especially people of color, were made to feel invisible or unimportant. Dana arrived at the hotel in the late afternoon, dressed casually in a simple pair of jeans and a jacket, her hair tied back in a ponytail. She wanted to blend in with the other guests, just as she had on that first fateful day, when she had been treated with such indifference. As she walked through the front doors of the hotel, she felt a wave of nostalgia. The luxurious lobby still gleamed, the marble floors reflecting the golden light from the chandeliers above. But there was something different now, something subtle but undeniable. The air felt warmer, more welcoming. Dana approached the front desk, where a young woman, no older than 25, greeted her with a friendly smile. "Good evening, welcome to the Grand Crest. How may I assist you today?" Dana smiled back, impressed by the warmth in the receptionist's voice. "I have a reservation," she said, handing over her confirmation. The receptionist immediately began typing into the computer, then looked back at Dana with a genuine smile. "Yes, Mrs. Morris. We've been expecting you. You've been assigned to our premium suite. Would you like assistance with your luggage?" Dana nodded, appreciating the smooth, professional interaction. This was a far cry from the treatment she had received 6 months ago. It was clear that the changes Dana had worked so hard to implement were taking effect. As Dana made her way to the elevator, she observed the other guests. An elderly black couple, dressed in their finest clothes, were checking in at the front desk. The receptionist greeted them warmly, and a bellhop immediately offered to escort them to their room. The couple looked pleased, as if they were truly being treated like VIPs, not just as token guests. Dana couldn't help but smile. This was what she had wanted, to see every guest, regardless of their background, treated with the same respect and kindness. The hotel had been reborn, and it was now living up to the standards she had always dreamed of. Dana made her way up to the premium suite, where she found her luggage already waiting. The room was as luxurious as ever, but it wasn't the opulence that made Dana proud. It was the fact that the service, every interaction she'd had so far, was seamless and genuine. There was no longer any hint of bias, no uncomfortable undertone, just respect. As she unpacked her things and settled into the suite, Dana's phone buzzed with a message from Claudia Rivera, the new general manager. "Just wanted to check in and see how things are going," the message read. Dana smiled and quickly typed a reply. "Everything is going well. The staff is doing great and the guests are happy. You've done an incredible job." Claudia's response came almost immediately. "We've still got work to do, but we're on the right track." Dana knew Claudia was right. The journey wasn't over yet. She couldn't afford to become complacent. But as she looked out of the suite's window, overlooking the lights of New York City, she felt a deep sense of pride. The Grand Crest was no longer just a luxury hotel. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people committed to true change. That evening, as Dana sat in the hotel's restaurant, she witnessed another moment that confirmed her belief in the transformation. A group of young, diverse professionals had gathered to celebrate a colleague's promotion. They were laughing, enjoying their food, and sharing stories. The restaurant staff moved around them with ease, offering attentive service without a hint of hesitation or bias. Dana overheard one of the servers, a young man with dark skin, chatting with a guest, asking if they needed anything else. He was courteous, friendly, and natural in his interactions. The old hotel culture of favoritism, where guests were treated differently based on their appearance or their perceived social status, had completely disappeared. Instead, a new culture was flourishing, one where every guest felt valued, where every employee was empowered to do their best. As the evening came to a close, Dana couldn't help but feel a profound sense of accomplishment. She had not just fixed a broken system, she had rebuilt it. The Grand Crest Hotel was now a beacon of fairness, inclusivity, and respect. And as her phone buzzed again with another message from Claudia, Dana knew that the journey was far from over, but it was heading in the right direction. In the following weeks, Dana's commitment to inclusivity spread throughout the rest of her hotel chain. Every property under the Horizon Luxe umbrella adopted the same values, the same mission. Employees were trained in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Bias training was made mandatory. And Dana worked tirelessly to ensure that the same standards were upheld across every location. The data was clear. The Grand Crest was thriving. Guest satisfaction scores were up across all demographics, and revenue had increased significantly. But more importantly, Dana knew that the change she had started wasn't just about profits. It was about creating a legacy that would endure long after she had moved on to her next challenge. As she sat back in her hotel suite, Dana took a deep breath and looked out at the city skyline. This wasn't just the beginning of a new chapter for the Grand Crest. It was the beginning of a new era in hospitality. A new era where everyone was welcome, and no one was made to feel like they didn't belong. And Dana Morris knew that this was only the start.